On the morning of March 31, 1943, Second Lieutenant Owen Bagot hung suspended in his parachute harness 4,000 feet above the Burmese jungle, blood running from his left arm as he watched a Japanese fighter circle back to finish what it had begun. The aircraft was a Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar, flown by a pilot from the 64th Sentai. Bagot had bailed out of his burning B-24 Liberator only seconds before it exploded. Two of his crewmates were already dead, shot while dangling helplessly beneath their parachutes. The Japanese pilots were hunting the survivors as if they were targets on a firing range. Bagot was 22 years old, a co-pilot who had been in theater for several months. He carried standard Army Air Forces issue gear, flight suit, parachute, survival kit, and a Colt M1911 pistol, a sidearm with 7 rounds of .45 caliber ammunition. The pistol weighed 2 pounds, had an effective range of roughly 50 yards against ground targets, and was utterly useless against an aircraft moving at 200 miles per hour. Owen Bagot had been born in Graham, Texas, on August 29, 1920. He attended Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene, graduating in 1941. While at university, he served as drum major for the cowboy band, a role that demanded discipline, leadership, and precision. After graduation, he took a job on Wall Street working as a defense contractor. The work was steady and the pay was good, but when Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941, Bagot made a decision. He enlisted in the Army Air Corps. He completed pilot training at New Columbus Army Flying School, graduating on July 26, 1942, with the rank of second lieutenant. From there, he was assigned to the 7th Bomb Group and deployed to India in late 1942. By March 1943, he had flown enough missions to understand the reality of the air war over Burma. It was brutal, unforgiving, and survival often depended on forces no one could control. That morning, no one believed a pistol could bring down a fighter aircraft. Manuals stated that pistols were for ground self-defense, for shooting enemy soldiers, not airplanes. Common sense said firing a handgun at a fighter was suicide, a pointless act that would only anger the pilot. Yet Bagot was about to do something that would become legend in the Army Air Forces, something so improbable that even he would struggle to believe it afterward. He was going to shoot down a Japanese fighter with his sidearm while hanging beneath a parachute. He would do it because he had nothing left to lose. The mission itself had gone wrong from the start. The 7th Bomb Group's 9th Bomb Squadron had been tasked with destroying a railroad bridge at Payinmana, Burma. The bridge lay midway between Rangoon and Mandalay, a vital supply route for Japanese forces pushing north. It was protected by anti-aircraft guns and covered by 2 nearby fighter bases. 12 B-24s were assigned to the strike, flying from Pandavsar airfield in India on a round trip exceeding 1,000 miles across enemy territory. The bridge at Payinmana was a strategic objective. Japanese supply trains used it to move troops, ammunition, and equipment north from Rangoon. Destroying it would disrupt logistics, slow operations, and buy time for Allied forces. Strategic importance, however, meant formidable defenses. The Japanese knew the Americans would eventually target the bridge and had positioned fighter units nearby specifically to defend infrastructure like it. The bombers would be alone. There would be no fighter escort and no backup. The P-40 Warhawks based in India lacked the range to accompany the B-24s all the way to Payinmana and back. The bombers would rely solely on their defensive guns, formation discipline, and luck, mostly luck. The formation was led by Colonel Conrad Neckerson, commander of the 7th Bomb Group. First Lieutenant Lloyd Jensen piloted the B-24 on Neckerson's right wing, with Bagot serving as Jensen's co-pilot. They took off at 0615, climbed to 13,000 feet, and headed east toward Burma. The B-24 Liberator was intended to be the Army Air Force's answer to long-range heavy bombing in the Pacific. It had 4 engines, a crew of 10, and defensive armament of 10.50 caliber machine guns. It could carry 5,000 pounds of bombs over 1,700 miles and cruise at 290 miles per hour. Its maximum altitude was 28,000 feet. The wingspan measured 110 feet, the length 67 feet. Designed by Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego, built in factories across the United States, and shipped to bases around the world, it looked formidable on paper. In reality, over Burma in 1943, it was a flying coffin. B-24s in the China-Burma-India theater operated without fighter escort. The distances were too vast, the terrain too hostile, and fighter resources too thinly spread. Bombers went in alone and hoped they could fight their way out. Most times, they could not. The China-Burma-India theater was the forgotten war. While public attention focused on Europe and the Pacific Island campaigns, a small number of American units fought a savage air war over some of the harshest terrain on Earth: mountains, jungles, monsoons, and disease. Supply lines stretched thousands of miles from India over the Himalayas into China. Everything needed to fight, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, had to be flown over mountain ranges that killed crews even when Japanese fighters did not. The 10th Air Force, responsible for operations in Burma, was the smallest of the Army Air Force's combat commands. At its peak in 1943, it fielded fewer than 300 aircraft. By comparison, the 8th Air Force in Europe had more than 2,000 bombers by mid-1943. The 10th was perpetually short of everything: aircraft, crews, supplies. Yet its mission was vital. Japan controlled Burma and the land routes from India into China. The only way to supply Chinese forces fighting Japan was by air over the Himalayas, a route known as the hump. The Japanese understood this. Strangle the hump, and China would be strangled. They invested heavily in Burma, built airfields, stationed fighter units, and prepared to intercept every American bomber and transport that crossed their territory. The 7th Bomb Group had been operating in Burma since December 1942. In 4 months, it had lost 18 aircraft, 18 crews, 180 men, dead, missing, or captured. The exchange ratio was merciless. For every Japanese fighter destroyed, 3 American bombers were lost. The numbers said flying B-24s over Burma was slow-motion suicide. Baggett knew the statistics. Everyone in the squadron did. They had watched too many aircraft depart and never return. They had packed too many footlockers and shipped too many personal effects home to families in Texas, Iowa, and California. The smell in the barracks never changed: aviation fuel, sweat, and fear. Aircraft vanished over the jungle. Crews failed to come back from missions. Casualty lists grew longer every week. The men who survived watched friends take off and disappear forever. Flying B-24s over Burma meant accepting that your chances of survival shrank with every mission. Some crews finished their tours. Many did not. Baggett understood that skill and training only went so far. Luck mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. Being in the wrong place at the wrong moment meant death, regardless of ability. The worst part was not always the combat. It was watching the empty bunks multiply in the barracks. It was knowing that any mission could be the last. It was the constant awareness that survival depended as much on chance as on competence. By late March 1943, the 9th Bomb Squadron had lost 7 aircraft in 6 weeks, 63 men dead or missing. Replacement crews arrived every 2 weeks, fresh from training, young, confident, and completely unprepared for what awaited them. Most lasted 3 missions. Some did not survive their first. The most terrifying part was the helplessness. When a B-24 was hit and going down, crews had 2 choices: stay with the aircraft and die in the crash, or bail out and hope Japanese pilots did not strafe them in their parachutes. Neither option offered comfort. Staying meant burning or hitting the ground at terminal velocity. Bailing out meant drifting slowly through hostile airspace while enemy fighters circled above, deciding whether to waste ammunition on defenseless men. The Geneva Convention declared shooting parachutists a war crime. Japanese pilots in Burma ignored it. They had been killing American airmen in their parachutes since February 1942. It was accepted practice, tolerated by commanders, and sometimes encouraged. The logic was cold but clear: an American airman who reached the ground might be rescued, might fly again, might kill more Japanese. Better to eliminate him while he was suspended in the air, unable to fight back. The fear of being shot while descending in a parachute was worse than the fear of crashing itself. At least in a crash, it was over quickly. Hanging in a parachute, you were completely exposed. You watched the fighter line up for the pass, watched the gun flashes, watched the tracers come at you, and there was nothing you could do except hope the pilot missed or ran out of ammunition before he killed you. Multiple American airmen had been killed this way in the months leading up to March 1943. The threat was real, documented, and terrifying. On the morning of March 31, 1943, Baggett's bomber was 60 miles from Pyam Mana when the Japanese fighters found them. 13 K-43 Oscars from the 64th Senti climbing from their base at Mingaladon. They'd been scrambled 20 minutes earlier when radar detected the American formation. The Japanese pilots knew exactly where the bombers were going and exactly how to intercept them. The K-43 was Japan's most widely used Army fighter in Burma. Light, agile, brutal in a dogfight, it could turn inside anything the Americans flew. Maximum speed 329 miles per hour, service ceiling 36,000 feet armed with two 12.7mm machine guns, the early models had almost no armor protection and no self-sealing fuel tanks, but that made them even lighter, even faster in a turn. Japanese pilots loved them. American bomber crews feared them. The 64th Centi had been flying K-43s since late 1941. They'd fought over Malaya, over Singapore, over the Dutch East Indies. By March 1943, they were veterans, experienced in intercepting heavy bombers, expert at exploiting the B-24's weaknesses. They knew that American bombers flew in formation for mutual defensive fire, knew that a damaged bomber-breaking formation was easy prey, knew that isolated crewmen in parachutes were even easier. The Japanese pilots who flew from Mingaladen Air Base near Rangoon were not the inexperienced replacements who'd started appearing in the Pacific by mid-1943. These were frontline pilots with months or years of combat experience. They'd learned their tactics in real combat, refined their skills against British Hurricanes and American P-40 Warhawks. They respected American firepower, but didn't fear it. They'd shot down enough Allied aircraft to know that aggression and coordination beat defensive gunfire. Their tactics for attacking bomber formations were sophisticated. They didn't just dive in randomly. They coordinated. One group would attack from one angle to draw defensive fire. Then the main attack would come from a different angle where the gunners were distracted. They knew the B-24's blind spots, knew where the defensive guns couldn't reach. They'd studied captured American aircraft, understood the armor protection, knew where to aim to do maximum damage, and they absolutely would strafe parachutes. It wasn't considered dishonorable in their doctrine. It was practical. An American airman who survived to fly another day meant more dead. Better to eliminate the threat while it was vulnerable. Some Japanese pilots found it distasteful, but most considered it a legitimate extension of combat. The enemy aircrew was an enemy combatant until proven otherwise. The attack came from above and behind out of the Sunday. Classic fighter tactics. The Ki-43s dove through the bomber formation at 400 miles per hour, guns blazing, braking hard before the defensive fire could hit them. Colonel Neckerson's aircraft took hits in the first pass. Neckerson was wounded in the shoulder and arm, kept flying. Jensen's bomber, the aircraft Baggett was riding in, took 20mm cannon rounds in the rear fuselage. The rounds punched through the thin aluminum skin and detonated inside the aircraft. One shell hit the oxygen system. The bottles exploded in a cascade of white vapor and metal fragments. The explosion started fires in 3 places simultaneously. Another round hit the number 4 engine, blew a hole through the cowling, shredded the oil cooler. The engine began smoking, then burning. 19-year-old Sergeant Samuel Crosstick was in the top turret when the oxygen bottles exploded. The blast threw him backward out of the turret seat, burned his face and hands. He grabbed 2 fire extinguishers and climbed back to the rear of the aircraft, trying to put out the fires. The flames were spreading too fast. The extinguishers ran out. The smoke got thicker, choking, blinding. The Japanese fighters came back for a second pass. This time, they concentrated on Jensen's crippled bomber. They knew it was wounded, knew it couldn't keep up with the formation. 4 Ki-43s attacked simultaneously from different angles. Machine gun rounds tore through the fuselage, the wings, the tail. The number 2 engine caught fire. Fuel streamed from ruptured tanks. The intercom system shorted out, went dead. Jensen fought the controls, trying to hold the aircraft level, trying to give his crew time to get out. The smoke in the cockpit was so thick he couldn't see the instrument panel. He could feel the aircraft losing altitude, feel it starting to spiral. He knew they had maybe 30 seconds before it became uncontrollable. He reached for the intercom to order the crew to bail out. Dead, no power. He looked back over his shoulder at Baggett and yelled, "Get them out. Tell them to jump." Baggett unstrapped, stumbled back through the smoke-filled fuselage. The fire was everywhere now, crawling along the walls, consuming everything. He found near the bomb bay, found 2 gunners trying to get the escape hatch open. He gestured wildly, pointing at the hatch, making jumping motions. The roar of the wind and engines drowned out any attempt at verbal communication. The crew understood. They grabbed their parachute packs, clipped them on, moved toward the hatches. Baggett counted heads. Multiple. Men moving through the smoke-filled fuselage toward escape hatches. He looked forward, saw Jensen still in the pilot seat, wrestling with the controls to keep the aircraft stable enough for the crew to bail out. Jensen waved him away, signaled for him to jump. The entire crew managed to escape the doomed bomber. 9 men total. They jumped from various hatches, pulled their ripcords, felt the hard jerk as their parachutes deployed. The B-24 exploded shortly after the last man cleared the aircraft. A massive fireball that consumed what remained of the Liberator. Baggett saw other parachutes, white canopies floating down around him in the morning sky. For a brief moment, relief flooded through him. They'd made it out. The crew had survived the aircraft. Then he looked up and saw the Ki-43s circling overhead. The Japanese fighters hadn't left. They were coming back. The Japanese fighters hadn't left. They'd watched the bomber go down, watched the crew bail out, and now they were coming back, not to dogfight, not to chase more bombers. They were coming back to kill the survivors. The Japanese fighters saw the parachutes and made a tactical decision. The bombers had escaped, but the crews were still vulnerable, hanging in parachutes, descending slowly, unable to maneuver or defend themselves effectively. They were easy targets. The first pass killed 2 men. The K-43s dove on the parachutes, opened fire at close range with their 12.7mm machine guns. The descending crewmen had no cover, no evasion, nowhere to hide. 2 men were hit by the gunfire, their bodies going limp in their harnesses as their parachutes continued to carry them down toward the jungle below. Baggett watched it happen. He saw the fighters make their attack runs, saw the gun flashes, saw his crewmates die in the air. He understood immediately that he was next. The fighters were systematically working through the parachutes, eliminating each survivor. He was hanging 4,000 feet above enemy territory with no way to defend himself and no way to escape. A Ki-43 peeled off from the circling formation and headed toward him. Baggett could see the painted cowling, the canopy, the gun ports in the wings. He could see the pilot's head moving in the cockpit. The fighter was closing fast, lining up for the attack. Baggett made a decision. He went limp in his harness, let his head drop forward, let his arms hang loose at his sides, playing dead. It was the only tactic he had. If the Japanese pilot thought he was already dead, maybe the pilot would ignore him, save ammunition for the other survivors. The Ki-43 came closer. Baggett watched it through slitted eyes, barely breathing, forcing himself to stay motionless. The fighter slowed as it approached, dropping speed, coming in almost at stall speed. The nose was high, the engine throttled back. The pilot was being careful, taking his time, making sure. Then Baggett saw something that changed everything. The canopy slid open. The Japanese pilot leaned out, looking at him from maybe 20 feet away, trying to verify that this American was dead or alive. That moment of curiosity, that decision to open the canopy and look, was the mistake that killed the Japanese pilot. Baggett's right hand had been hanging at his side, positioned against his leg. In his hand was his M1911 pistol. He'd drawn it the moment he saw the fighters circling. He'd concealed it against his body while playing dead. Now the pilot was right there, canopy open, aircraft nearly stalled, close enough to hit with a thrown rock. Baggett raised the pistol and fired for shots as fast as he could pull the trigger. The range was less than 20 feet. The target was a human head in an open cockpit. He aimed for the pilot's face and fired. He saw at least one round hit. The pilot's head snapped back. Blood sprayed inside the cockpit. The pilot slumped forward. The K-43's nose dropped. The aircraft fell away, spinning out of control. Baggett watched it spiral down, watched it disappear below him into the jungle. The other Japanese fighters saw what happened. They saw their comrades' aircraft fall, saw the American in the parachute with his arm extended, pistol in hand. They understood immediately. One of their pilots had just been shot down by a man hanging from a parachute. They came after Baggett with everything they had. 3 Ki-43s dove on him, simultaneously, guns firing. Baggett had no cover, no evasion, nowhere to hide. He could only hang there and hope they missed. The bullets tore past him, ripped through the parachute canopy, snapped the suspension lines. Somehow none of them hit him. The fighters pulled up, circled, prepared for another pass. Baggett kept falling. The ground was getting closer. 1,000 feet, 800, 600. The fighters made another attack run. This time they concentrated on his parachute, trying to collapse it, trying to make him fall faster. More bullets, more holes in the silk. The parachute started to lose effectiveness, started to oscillate and spill air. Baggett kept falling. The ground was getting closer. 1,000 feet, 800, 600. The fighters made another attack run, concentrating fire on his parachute canopy, trying to collapse it. Bullets ripped through the silk, creating holes that reduced the parachute's effectiveness. The canopy started oscillating, spilling air, but it held together enough to slow his descent. At lower altitude, the fighters broke off their attack. Too dangerous to continue diving runs so close to the ground. Baggett crashed through the jungle canopy, smashed through branches, hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the wind out of him. He lay there gasping, trying to breathe, trying to process that he was still alive. He checked himself for injuries. The bullet graze on his left arm was bleeding, but not serious. His ribs hurt from the landing impact. His hands were shaking from adrenaline, but he was on the ground, conscious and mobile. That put him ahead of two of his crewmates who'd been killed in their parachutes. Lieutenant Jensen had landed nearby. They found each other by calling out through the dense jungle vegetation. Sergeant Samuel Krostick, the 19-year-old gunner who'd fought the fires in the burning bomber, had also survived. 3 men from the 9-member crew reunited on the ground in enemy territory. The others were either dead or scattered across miles of jungle. They didn't have time to look for survivors. They could hear voices in the distance, Burmese villagers moving through the jungle toward the crash site. The local population was split between those who helped Americans and those who turned them over to the Japanese. Baggett and his crew didn't know which kind they were about to meet. It turned out to be the wrong kind. The villagers found them within an hour, took them prisoner, marched them to the nearest Japanese garrison. The Japanese soldiers were polite, efficient, and very interested in the fact that Baggett had apparently shot down a fighter aircraft with a pistol. Baggett was transported to a Japanese army facility near Rangoon, interrogated by intelligence officers, then sent to Changi Prison in Singapore. The prison held Allied prisoners from across Southeast Asia. Most were starving, diseased, brutalized. The Japanese guards were known for their cruelty. Baggett expected the same treatment. Instead, when he arrived at Changi, something bizarre happened. The camp commandant, Major General Aramura, summoned him for a private meeting. Aramura spoke through an interpreter, asked Baggett to explain exactly what had happened during the parachute descent. Baggett told the story: the burning bomber, the bailout, the fighters strafing the parachutes, the Japanese pilot opening his canopy, the 4 shots from the pistol. Aramura listened carefully, asked questions, had the interpreter verify details. When Baggett finished, Aramura sat back and smiled. The general said that what Baggett had done was extraordinary. It showed courage, resourcefulness, warrior spirit, the kind of spirit that Japanese officers respected. Aramura said that because of this feat, he was going to offer Baggett a great honor. He would be allowed to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, the honorable death of a samurai. Aramura had an officer demonstrate the proper technique: the short blade, the abdominal cut, the second person to behead you and end the suffering. Aramura explained that this was far better than dying slowly in a prison camp from disease or starvation. This was a warrior's death, dignified, respected. Baggett declined politely but firmly. He said that in American culture, suicide was not considered honorable. He would take his chances in the prison camp. Aramura seemed disappointed but accepted the decision. Baggett was sent to the main prison population with the other Allied captives. Life in Changi prison was exactly as brutal as he'd expected. Starvation, rations, disease, forced labor, beatings from guards who used prisoners for entertainment. Baggett's weight dropped from 180 pounds to 90 pounds over the next 2 years. He survived dysentery, malaria, beriberi, and multiple infections from untreated wounds. Many prisoners didn't survive. The death rate in Changi was 40%. Changi held over 50,000 Allied prisoners at various points during the war. British, Australian, Dutch, American officers and enlisted men mixed together in overcrowded barracks that had been built to hold a fraction of that number. Sanitation was primitive. Medical care was almost non-existent. The Japanese provided minimal food, forcing prisoners to supplement their rations by growing vegetables in small plots, trading with guards, stealing when possible. The daily routine was grinding. Morning roll, call at dawn, work details throughout the day, building projects for the Japanese military, loading ships at the docks, maintaining roads. The work was hard, the conditions brutal. Men collapsed from heat exhaustion, from disease, from malnutrition. The guards beat anyone who couldn't keep up. If you couldn't work, you didn't eat. If you didn't eat, you got weaker. If you got weaker, you couldn't work. It was a death spiral that killed thousands. But prisoners adapted. They organized, established command structures, maintained discipline despite the conditions. Senior officers ensured that younger enlisted men got slightly larger rations when possible. Doctors and medics worked miracles with almost no supplies, treating infections with homemade remedies, performing surgery with improvised instruments. The prisoners built a secret radio from scavenged parts, listened to Allied broadcasts, passed information through the camp in whispers. The psychological toll was worse than the physical. Not knowing if you'd survive, not knowing if your family knew you were alive, not knowing when or if the war would end. Some men gave up, stopped eating, stopped fighting. They'd sit in the barracks staring at nothing, and within days they'd be dead. Others clung to hope, to anger, to the determination to survive just to spite their captives. But something strange happened during Baggett's imprisonment. He was treated differently than the other prisoners. Not well, but differently. Guards who beat other prisoners left him alone. Japanese officers who visited the camp asked to meet him asked him to tell the story of shooting down the fighter. He became something of a legend among the Japanese garrison. The American who killed a pilot with a pistol while floating in the sky. In November 1943, Colonel Harry Melton was shot down over Rangoon and captured. Melton was commander of the 311th Bombardment Group, an experienced aviator who'd been flying combat missions in the theater. He was transported through several prison camps before arriving at Changi. During his transport, Melton's Japanese guards told him a story. They said that a few months earlier, an American bomber crew had been shot down near Piamana. One of the crew members had done something incredible. While parachuting down, he'd drawn his pistol and shot a Japanese pilot in the head. The fighter had crashed. The pilot had been thrown from the wreckage. When they found the body, there was a single bullet wound through the skull. When Melton arrived at Changi, he asked around Americans from the 7th Bomb Group. He found Baggett, heard the whole story directly from him. Melton said he would file an official report when he got back to Allied lines, document what Baggett had done, make sure he received proper recognition. Melton never got the chance. In July 1944, he was transferred to a different camp, loaded on a transport ship bound for Japan. The ship was torpedoed by an American submarine. Melton and 300 other prisoners went down with it. His testimony about Baggett's feet died with him. Baggett remained in Changi until September 7, 1945. The war ended on August 15 with Japan's surrender. 2 weeks later, 8 Office of Strategic Services agents parachuted into Singapore and liberated the prison. Baggett and 37 other prisoners were evacuated by air to Allied hospitals in India. Baggett weighed 92 pounds when he was rescued. He was so weak he couldn't walk more than 50 feet without resting. His teeth were loose from scurvy. His skin was covered in sores and scars. He looked like a skeleton wrapped in gray skin. The doctors said he would have died within 3 months if the war had continued. But he was alive and somewhere in his mind, underneath the trauma and the starvation and the disease, he carried the memory of 4 pistol shots fired at a Japanese pilot 20 feet away. He wasn't sure if he'd actually hit the pilot. He wasn't sure if the fighter had crashed because of his shots or for some other reason. He had no proof, no witnesses still alive, no official confirmation. The Army Air Forces were skeptical, too. When Baggett was debriefed after his rescue, intelligence officers listened to his story and wrote it down, but they didn't confirm it. They didn't award him a medal or a citation. The official report listed Bagot as a prisoner of war who had been liberated from Changi prison. Nothing about shooting down an aircraft with a pistol. For years, the story existed in a strange limbo. Some pilots believed it, some didn't. Some thought Bagot was exaggerating or misremembering, or that the fighter had crashed for unrelated reasons without witnesses or wreckage or Japanese confirmation. There was no way to prove it had happened. Then in 1946, Army Air Forces investigators reviewed records captured from Japanese military units in Burma. They were looking for information about missing American airmen, trying to match names with graves, close out casualty reports. The Japanese had been meticulous record keepers despite the chaos of war. Unit logs, loss reports, maintenance records, personnel files, everything had been documented in careful Japanese script filed in cabinets stored in administrative buildings across Burma and Thailand. Allied translators worked through thousands of pages of captured documents. Most were routine, boring administrative paperwork, but occasionally they'd find something significant. A mention of an American aircrew, a notation about a crashed bomber, a reference to prisoners taken and locations where they were sent. Every scrap of information helped families back home learn the fate of missing sons and husbands. While reviewing records from the 64th Century, they found something interesting. The unit had filed loss reports for March 1943. Standard practice, every Japanese unit filed these reports after combat operations. Aircraft lost, pilots killed, causes determined when possible. One report dated March 31 mentioned a Ki-43 that had crashed near P. Mana after engaging American bombers. The pilot was listed as killed in action. The cause of the crash was listed as unknown. The aircraft had not been hit by defensive fire from the bombers. No Allied fighters were in the area. The aircraft simply fell out of formation and crashed. The investigators cross-referenced that report with Bagot's account. The date matched, the location matched, the circumstances matched. Japanese fighter had crashed on the same day in the same area during the same engagement where Bagot claimed to have shot one down. The timing was precise within the same 15-minute window. That wasn't proof. It was suggestive, but not conclusive. The fighter could have suffered mechanical failure, could have been hit by debris from the exploding B-24, could have stalled accidentally while the pilot was distracted. Aircraft crashed for many reasons, especially in combat. A correlation in time and place didn't prove causation, but the investigators noted something else in the report. The Japanese recovery team had found the pilot's body 20 yards from the wreckage. He'd been thrown clear on impact, which sometimes happened when an aircraft hit the ground at high speed. They documented his injuries in the after-action report, as was standard procedure. The cause of death was listed as head trauma, specifically a penetrating wound to the skull, consistent with a bullet, not shrapnel, not blunt force trauma from the crash, a bullet wound. The Army Air Forces quietly updated Bagot's service record. They credited him with one enemy aircraft destroyed. They didn't make a big announcement, didn't issue a press release, didn't recommend him for a medal. They simply noted in his file that on March 31, 1943, Second Lieutenant Owen Bagot had shot down a Japanese Ki-43 fighter with his service pistol while descending in a parachute. Bagot stayed in the Army Air Forces after the war. It became the United States Air Force in 1947 and he stayed with it. He flew transport missions during the Berlin airlift, served in Korea, worked his way up through the ranks. He was good at his job, professional, reliable. He didn't talk much about the war. When people asked, he'd mentioned flying bombers in Burma, being a prisoner, but he rarely brought up the pistol incident unless directly questioned. The transition from prisoner of war to PCM officer was difficult for many veterans. Bagot handled it better than most. He focused on the work, on the mission, on taking care of the people under his command. He earned a reputation as a fair leader, someone who didn't raise his voice, but always got results. His efficiency reports were consistently excellent. Superiors noted his technical competence, his attention to detail, his ability to manage complex logistics operations. He was promoted to captain in 1950. The rank came with new responsibilities, commanding larger units, making decisions that affected hundreds of personnel. He handled it well, demonstrated the kind of leadership the Air Force valued: steady, reliable, unflappable. In 1955, he made major, took command of a transport squadron. His squadron set records for on-time deliveries, maintained the highest aircraft readiness rates in the wing. In 1961, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel, assigned to planning staff at Strategic Air Command Headquarters. The work was bureaucratic, pushing paper, writing reports, attending meetings, but it was important work, supporting the bomber and missile forces that formed America's nuclear deterrent during the Cold War. Baggett excelled at it, proved he could handle the administrative side of the Air Force as well as the operational side. His final promotion came in 1968. Full colonel. It was the rank most officers aspired to but few achieved. Only about 2% of officers made colonel. It meant recognition, respect, significant authority. Baggett wore it well, never let it go to his head. Treated junior officers and enlisted personnel with the same courtesy he showed generals. He retired from the Air Force in 1973 after 31 years of service. His service record was exemplary. Multiple commendations, efficiency reports that praised his leadership and technical skill. He worked with military children's programs, sponsored kids through the Air Force's Commander for a Day program. He was known for being kind, patient, humble. After retirement, Baggett took a job with Litton Industries, working as a defense contractor manager. He lived in New Braunfels, Texas. He married, had children, lived a quiet suburban life. He went to church on Sundays, mowed his lawn on Saturdays, attended Air Force reunions when he could. At the reunions, other veterans would sometimes ask him about Burma, about the parachute incident. Baggett would tell the story, but always downplayed it. He'd say he got lucky, said he wasn't even sure he'd hit the pilot, said the fighter might have crashed for other reasons. He never claimed to be a hero. He said he'd just been trying to survive. In the 1980s, a military historian named Robert Dorr was researching unusual aerial combat incidents from World War II. He came across a reference in archived Air Force records about an airman who'd allegedly shot down a fighter with a pistol. Dorr tracked down Baggett through veteran registries, called him, asked if he'd be willing to talk. Baggett agreed. Dorr interviewed him for 6 hours, recorded everything, verified details against Japanese and American records. Dorr concluded that the incident had almost certainly happened the way Baggett described it. The timing was right, the location was right, the Japanese records supported it. Dorr wrote in Article 4 Air Force magazine in 1986. The story spread from there. Suddenly, Baggett was famous. Military journals contacted him. History programs requested interviews. Aviation enthusiasts sent letters. He was invited to speak at Air Force functions, veterans reunions, and museums. The story of the pistol kill had become legend, the kind of unbelievable account people loved precisely because it sounded too absurd to be real. Baggett handled the attention with quiet dignity. He attended some events and politely declined others. He appreciated the acknowledgement but never chased it. When asked whether he was proud of what he had done, he would say he was proud to have served and proud to have survived. Shooting down a fighter with a pistol was not something he had planned or trained for. It was desperation, chance, and a mistake by a Japanese pilot. Nothing more. Colonel Harry Melton's family learned of Baggett's story in the late 1980s. They reached out to Baggett and shared letters and documents Melton had written before his death. One letter, dated December 1943, described meeting an American prisoner who had shot down a Japanese fighter with a pistol. Melton wrote that he intended to submit an official report recommending Baggett for recognition. The letter confirmed what Japanese guards had told Melton: the pilot had been found with a gunshot wound to the head. That letter became the final piece of evidence. When combined with Japanese loss records, American mission reports, and Baggett's consistent account over the years, it established beyond reasonable doubt that on March 31, 1943, IB-24 co-pilot had accomplished something no one had done before or since. He had shot down an enemy fighter with a handgun while suspended beneath a parachute. Owen Baggett died on July 27, 2006, in New Braunfels, Texas. He was 85 years old. His obituary listed his service in World War II, his years in the Air Force, and his work with children's programs. It mentioned that he was known for his kindness and his smile. It noted that he had forgiven his captors and had never spoken with bitterness about his imprisonment. It did not mention that he had achieved something unique in the history of aerial warfare. It did not say that he had fired 4 shots at a moving target from an unstable platform in high winds and struck a human head from 20 feet away. It did not mention that he had brought down a fighter aircraft trying to kill him using a weapon designed for ground combat, or that he had done it while wounded, terrified, and falling through the sky at 16 feet per second. At his funeral, 3 Air Force generals were present. They presented his family with a flag and a citation. The citation listed his decorations, his service record, and his contributions to the Air Force. At the bottom, in small print, it stated that Colonel Baggett was credited with 1 aerial victory against enemy aircraft. No explanation, just that single line. His grave is located at Fort Sam Houston National Cemetery in San Antonio, Texas. The headstone is simple: his name, his rank, his dates of birth and death, and beneath them, United States Air Force. There is nothing about Burma, nothing about Changi Prison, nothing about the pistol, only the bare facts of a life spent in service. Yet among aviators and historians, Owen Baggett's name carries weight. He is studied at air combat schools, not as a tactical lesson, but as a reminder that in war, the impossible sometimes happens. That desperation breeds invention. That the most effective weapon is not always the largest gun or the fastest aircraft, but the willingness to attempt something reckless when there is nothing left to lose. The Japanese pilot who died that day remains unidentified. No name appears in American records. Japanese documents list him only as a pilot from the 64th Sentai killed in action on March 31, 1943. His family would have been notified that he died in combat. They would not have been told that he was shot by a man hanging beneath a parachute. That detail was too humiliating to appear in official reports. Among Japanese fighter pilots in Burma, the incident became a warning story. Accounts circulated through fighter units. An American had killed one of their own with a pistol. The lesson was unmistakable. Never underestimate the enemy. Never assume someone is helpless. Never approach so closely that a desperate man with a handgun can reach you. The effect went beyond individual pilots. Japanese tactical doctrine in the Burma theater quietly shifted after March 1943. Pilots were instructed to strafe parachutists from greater distances, to maintain speed, and never to close in close enough for the enemy to fire back. The change was not linked to any specific incident in official documents, but flight leaders understood the reason. The Americans had learned that descending under a parachute did not mean surrender. American bomber crews learned the lesson as well. Word of Baggett's feat spread throughout the China-Burma-India theater by April 1943. Within 2 months, nearly every aircrew knew the story. Pilots and gunners began practicing pistol shooting before missions, just in case. It never happened again. No one else ever shot down a fighter with a handgun. But the knowledge that it could be done altered how men thought about survival. That is how real impact happens in war. Not through official memoranda or tactical manuals, but through stories passed from crew to crew, from squadron to squadron. A second lieutenant does something desperate and unbelievable. It works. Everyone hears about it. Behavior changes. The enemy adapts. And decades later, historians piece together the evidence and realize that a single moment, 4 pistol shots fired at point-blank range, changed how 2 air forces thought about aerial combat. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. We would also love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community stretches from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You are part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.